Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by Una, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barner. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Kris Lance. Kris is Vice President and General Manager at Una, a group purchasing organization that provides the Sourcing Hero with its home. Kris joins me every month to tackle a current news story or topic of interest from his own point of view. So, hey, Kris, welcome back. Happy October.
Happy October. Here we're in the thick of it.
So last month, we talked about the possibility of a few October surprises and what they might be and what the source of them might be.
Mhm.
And I think without intending to, because we were talking about economy and finance at the time, you may have actually hit the nail on the head. Do you remember what you said last month?
Yes, I actually do. I think it was hindsight being 2020 is probably a poor choice of words, but you had asked me kind of my financial outlook, and if that would maybe be the October surprise or would it manifest itself in the financial realm. And I said, I'm taking cover because there's a hurricane bearing down on the US. And my goodness, was there not one, but two. So
You are not kidding. We're just grateful that's not the kind of thing one person can cause, because you might be fielding some unhappy phone calls and LinkedIn messages right now
right.
if that was. But obviously, we're talking about a pairing of storms that have just hit the East Coast in the U.S. So Hurricane Helene hit Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, Tennessee, Virginia, and very notably, as we've seen from TV, North Carolina. They really got walloped. Hurricane Milton, less than 2 weeks later, clobbered Florida. Now, it's interesting because I know people that live in all of the different places associated with these hurricanes, but in particular, North Carolina. Kris, I'm interested in all of the news coverage. What are some of the stories and human experiences that have stood out in your mind?
Well, there's been a lot really, and I think that a lot of the things that have been jumping out to me, they coincide or kind of entangle with each other, but they're all kind of different in their own respect. So like even leading up, to the hurricane, the one that kind of just hovered over North Carolina, what caught my attention was, well, at first leading up to the hurricane, nobody was talking about how well, at least what I was following, how severe it was or it could have been. Now, admittedly, I watch I watch more of my weather channel is usually like Ryan Hall y'all on YouTube, or kind of more we'll call them amateur meteorologists.
Sure.
But what's interesting is almost all of them signaled how the storm looks really weird. Not that it was massive, not that it was going to be devastating. They had their own cautions, but that it just looked weird. So then you fast forward, and this hurricane goes up the entire coast and seemingly hovers over North Carolina and Tennessee, and just unprecedented, almost biblical level damage
Yeah.
that some of the images and things I'm seeing. And so from the jump, I was kind of curious, I'll say, like that it doesn't make sense, because one thing I've noticed, I think post Katrina, is they usually take hurricanes pretty seriously.
Absolutely, they do.
So that was the first thing that just felt weird, but then it's like almost the whole story just seems off to me. It's almost too much, just doesn't make sense. Like one of the things that very quickly after the aftermath, that I really kind of latched onto, and I'm still just exploring, I'll say, but it was really around like the amount of lithium and quartz deposits that are in that area. And I guess Duke Energy was lobbying for certain parts of that land. I mean, to the tune of like $300 billion.
Wow.
And so then, I started asking questions and digging deeper. But I guess to answer your question is I've seen numerous stories that just don't make sense. I'll take something a little bit more direct to the storm, but I saw that the dams, I've seen conflicting reports, some saying that the dams were opened, but really, let's just say that the dams broke. I was reading when I did my research that there were alerts about Asheville's dams up in North Fork since 2004. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, so again, I spiraled a little bit, right? Because you and we've been talking about these infrastructure bills and all of this spending, and I'm like, nobody fixed the dam that literally just swept away lives, like thousands. Like I think they're still pulling bodies out of
Yeah.
bushes and mud and lakes, and so I don't know, I might have spiraled on you a little bit here, but there are just so many different stories and different trails I think to follow within this own story itself. So.
Well, and it's interesting. It actually reminds me of something you said, I think near the end of 2023.
Mm,
And we were looking ahead a little bit and talking, and you had said something to the effect of it's not about having a plan A. Everybody's got to
mm,
have a plan A. This is about having plans B, C, and D.
mhm,
And the opposite of that, in some ways, is rather than having plans 3 layers deep, the other option is take care of things when you find out there's something wrong with them.
mhm,
I
yep,
mean, not everything can be fixed immediately, right? There's resource constraints, there's budgetary constraints, there's all kinds of different things that require delay or require priorities to be set. But if this is part of the infrastructure where there's been a problem for 2 decades,
mhm,
feels like somewhere along the way it could have been avoided. What happened if maybe instead of priorities A, B, C, and D, this was like somebody's okay list of things I'm watching.
yeah,
This one needs to move up to A in terms of priority of what gets fixed,
mhm,
because we all have things that we're letting go. We
mhm,
all have things we know. Oh yeah, this is the weekend I'm going to fix that. Next month is when I'm going to fix that. Eventually, circumstances will come together such that you've kind of missed your window. And
mhm.
now you're dealing with a completely different kind of situation as a result.
Absolutely. It's like that quote. I think I've said it with you before, but it's like, you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of
No.
ignoring reality. And so to your point, like fixing a dam, like that's not a Monday detail, right? So where
No.
where along the line over the course of 20 years did somebody drop the ball? Or maybe I'm not necessarily looking for one person to place blame on. Like where did the city, where did the county, how did something so critical? How do you lose sight of those things? Yeah.
Now, what we're going to talk about today is we're actually going to draw some lessons that
Mm,
all of us, whether we live in the region or not, I think a lot of these lessons will apply to us personally as well as professionally.
mhm,
But we're sort of going to break this down into preparation beforehand, response in the immediate aftermath, and then their longer term recovery.
mhm,
So, starting with preparation, you've talked about the fact that you were watching weather reports about the storm. You don't live anywhere near where these storms hit. So it's not like you were in the region, but you were still keeping an eye on it.
mhm.
When we think about whether it's information or having supplies on hand, does it seem like there are forms of preparation that have might have helped people or businesses deal with what they're going through now?
I I think so. This is a question I've been thinking, right? Like what if Una was in North Carolina? How would we be doing right now? Do we have the right contingencies in place? And I believe the answer is yes. But I did spiral trying to think of trying to wrap my mind around what that would even look like. I don't intend to come off insensitive, right? What we're talking about preparation. Hindsight's always 2020. So for any listeners in North Carolina, I'm not certainly not throwing any shade. It's just what can we learn from this? But the first thing I would say, yeah, it's like you just said, I don't live anywhere near that. Why was I watching the weather? I mean, I would ask anybody, why are you not?
Yeah.
And so I think, we've talked about this before. A lot of it is mindset, or maybe it is how you're viewing specific priorities. I don't necessarily expect the New Madrid fault to shift tomorrow and Missouri to drop into an abyss, but do I stay aware of what's going on with solar activity and weather activity? Yeah, because it just sounds like good judgment to me. And so whether it's weather, whether it's financial, I think everybody should be looking at what's ahead, what's next. And Kelly, that's what we've always talked about, right? Specifically, you and
Absolutely.
I, is it's not even about the one story. It's about how these stories and how these topics coincide and come to a head. And so if you do your due diligence across a variety of different levels of research, I'll say, well, then I think you're just by default better prepared for just unknowns and just questions. Now, back to your initial question on could any level of preparation have helped people or businesses? I mean, maybe there's some communities I'm in where I know people who are out being impacted by this, and by the nomenclature, I think the regular term you would maybe call them preppers, right?
Mhm.
10 to 15 years of that is now gone. So, yeah, were they prepared? Yeah, but not for that. And now
Right.
everything that they've spent their time on is now gone. So, I think there is still wisdom in preparing and being prudent. But I think a lot of times, and I think this might be a Mike Tyson quote, but it's like everyone's going to have a plan, but what happens when you get punched in the mouth? And so yeah, you can have the satellite phones for your team. You can have the redundancies in place. You can have everything on the cloud. But if there's a flood or an earthquake, then what? Then it comes down to the response. Do you have a plan to actually respond to those sort of disasters? So,
And part of that response actually takes us into the next phase of this process. And it's not about did you have batteries or do you have candles or did you have, I don't know, canned food available? It's about the foundational skills that you, your family, your community have at your disposal.
yes.
One of the things I remember learning from my friends that live in North Carolina is that this is by and large part of the country where people have maintained a lot of the, I'm going to say old skills, but I'm sure there's a better term for it, but really foundational survival skills. Owning a chainsaw, knowing how to operate it, being able to wash clothes without running water, knowing how to find your own food source and cook it without a microwave to make it safe to eat. Some of these skills, especially as you get up into the mountains of North Carolina, still very much exist.
Mhm.
And I remember hearing in one of the news stories that in any response situation, there's multiple phases. So usually first is, immediate rescue, getting people out or dealing with health and medical issues. Then you go to a big one, potable water,
Mm.
right?
Yep.
Being able to drink water. But I remember hearing at one point, it's a constantly moving ball that at some point, the number one need was chainsaw oil because they had gotten to the point where the other needs had been met. But now we've moved on to we are running these chainsaws
Mm.
16, 18 hours a day, and we're needing to tighten the chains and oil them up so that they keep operating. Not something that you would think about if you're far away and want to help, but that's exactly in that moment what's needed. And so having people with the expertise to help guide the recovery and supply it through its many phases, that strikes me as a really interesting way to look at this situation.
Yeah.
Were there any stories like that that caught your eye, your ear going through in the immediate aftermath?
Well, I almost cut you there, but I absolutely loved what you were saying there at the onset about how much of this is, or I'll say their proper in North Carolina, their community, like
Yeah.
really springing into action and knowing who knows how to do this or who knows how to do that. I heard one story of, it's like we'll call it old skill. I have this skill, but ham radio. Who knows how to
Right.
operate ham radio? And I guess there was a story where there was I guess an elderly woman who knew ham radio, but nobody could get in touch with her because they didn't know ham radio. But I guess others in the family were able to track somebody down who knew somebody, so they put something out over the airwaves, and it just so happened that emergency responder was going down that road and heard the call and saw the house with a tree on it,
That's crazy.
and the elderly woman was in the basement, couldn't get to her ham, and she was trapped under stuff like as her basement was flooding. But because of that old skill, they were able to, like in the nick of time, on the other side of the state, able to help somebody. And so it's also less about things is where I'm going with that. And it can be more about people. Who do you know? What skills do they have? And who can you really rely on? I mean, right now, everything right now is all seemingly geared toward divisive topics around the election. I
Mhm.
would argue, well, okay, who cares what sign your neighbor has in their yard? Would they help you tomorrow if something happened? Like, how strong is your
Yeah.
community to respond when it's, a life or death situation like we're seeing take place out there?
And also, too, as time goes on, because it's been a couple of weeks now,
Mhm.
it's getting cold. I mean, I'm in the Boston area. The last few nights, it's been dropping into the mid to low 40 degrees at night, and
Jeez.
I'm not up in a mountain.
Mhm.
So, as it starts to get cold, some of these situations that were certainly unfamiliar, certainly uncomfortable, but are now bordering on unsurvivable, we're
Mhm.
starting to look at not just changing macro conditions in terms of the climate and the weather, but also longer term. You know that it's only going to be so long before sort of the post-mortems start to come out.
Mhm.
What worked and what didn't. And the two big things that I've heard about so far, one was a question, and it's just simply, where was FEMA?
Mhm.
Now, there's word now that FEMA's on the ground. Some people have seen them. Some recovery checks have come through. So some of that's starting to work. But it's interesting that volunteer, community, church-based organizations were not only significantly faster than the federal government when it came to recovery, they were also more visible. And I think that's part of what's important in a time like that. Whose trucks do you see? I heard Samaritan's Purse was everywhere almost instantly.
Mhm.
People need to see that. They need to feel like someone's coming. Um, and the other topic that's starting to come up now is questions about insurance
Mhm.
and how property and homeowners insurance is going to be managed in some of these parts of the country. It's definitely come up with Florida because it's so expensive anyway. And then what does it cover for people who had it? Can the insurance companies afford to pay out on some of these policies? The people that live there are feeling the effects of these hurricanes now, and unfortunately will continue to for months. But systemically, some of these learnings and some of the fallout is going to have a multi-year time frame associated with it.
Mhm.
What do you see in terms of what we can learn longer term?
Well, so first of all, I think you're absolutely right as far as in situations like that, the morale, right? And seeing, who cares if it's one person standing there with a bottle of water, right? Is help there? I think that does wonders for morale. Samaritan's Purse, very well aware of that. And then also in my community, there were other smaller channels who are finding ways to get funds and things out there. Like, I know we just went through all the old baby clothes we were looking to sell and donate and stuff, and we shipped, I think it was like 4 or 5 boxes worth of baby clothes and blankets and things like that out personally, because sadly I've heard the same thing as you did, is that where's FEMA? I heard it for, I'll say it this way, longer than I should have. People were
Mm,
just like, where is FEMA? And then I don't, I haven't seen this from a reputable source, but I mean, what's reputable these days? But I did see that once FEMA did arrive, that they were confiscating supplies, or that supplies were being blocked, and that they were trying to throttle what was going in and going out, which I can understand, depending on how catastrophic or how dangerous some areas
sure.
might be, wanting to like section off certain areas. But I digress. To your point, I saw in my community, I know they were able to get in touch with the CEO of was it the Mr. Buddy heaters, and he's donating, I forget how many, they're shipping out as many of those portable space heaters and the propane as they possibly can. So again, going back to community and the response and being able to help. Um, yeah, because sadly it is getting cold. What tugged on our
Yeah.
heartstring to start donating was I read an article where there was a mother who literally was holding her baby as it froze to death and perished because just literally nobody had a blanket that was not cold or wet.
Mm.
So yeah, I think the aftermath and the recovery, I think it was great to see people responding. It would have been better to see the government, specifically FEMA, respond a little bit faster. it felt like my heart was torn out of my chest and thrown on the ground when I saw FEMA come out and say that they ran out of hurricane funds already, but I think it was 48 hours afterwards, we sent millions of dollars over to Lebanon. I was enraged when I read that. But I think what's important is that the people in North Carolina that I'm talking to, what they continue to say over and over and over is we're taking care of our own,
Yes.
and that they are being helped. They're being clear that it's not from the government, but that they are being helped. So what can we learn? What can we learn from that? I have a shirt that says this. I always get comments, but it says no one is coming to save you. And I think
Mhm.
that whether you believe it in your heart or not, if you think that way, if you prepare for life that way, I think you'll be better suited for when situations like this that nobody could have seen coming. That not only necessarily that you're able to take care of yourself, but that you're in a position to help other people. I think is important. So,
Well, and I think that transitions nicely to where I wanted to kind of finish this conversation. We
mhm,
always like to leave people with a little bit of inspiration, even when we're looking at a difficult topic like the aftermath of these deadly hurricanes. When we try to draw inspiration from a situation like this, I'll often think to myself, if I were there, I hope I would have.
mhm,
And there's always some kind of answer because the situation's always different, right? But you'll think to yourself, okay, when I look at all the different responses people and organizations are having to this, I would hope that I would be this kind of person instead of that. Or I would hope I would find the strength to achieve this stretch thing as opposed to sort of crumbling under the pressure of it.
mm.
Can you look at this series of events and sort of transport yourself there and think about if you were there, Kris, what do you hope you would have done or who do you hope you would have been?
It's a it's a really it's a really dark place to put yourself. Sadly, so I think on its face, um, yeah, it's heavy, right? But when we're talking about they still don't have a death toll.
I know.
And so when I look at it from that view, as basic as it seems, is do you have your life and do you have your family? Um, and if that's the case, then what can you not accomplish together? That's how I would. That's how I know. That's how I'll say lead my family. That's what how I would try to get us all moving in the same direction. Is look, we're all here and we're all okay. Sadly, what if someone wasn't though? Right?
Mm,
It's tough. Um, on the outside looking in, it's easier for me to say, in the middle of the country, farther away from it, it's easy to sit back and say, "Wow, can you imagine?" Okay, well, let's imagine it. What would I do? What can I do now to make sure that that never happens to me or my family? And that's how I would look at it. I I really don't know though. I'll tell you that my heart is it's really hurting for the people out there. And so what I would say is for any sort of encouragement is know that you're not alone. Um, you don't have TVs and internet to see, but you are getting the coverage, despite what mainstream news is there, and that there's people across the country who are pulling for you, who are donating, who are trying to help. And I think that's the way to look at it is you'll have to look for any sliver of joy or happiness, and then try to find a way to spread it. Because in yeah, Kelly, putting myself in the situation of a father or a mother who's just lost everything material, but then on top of that, potentially lost their children. I There's no words that are going to fix that. Um, so I guess it's focus on what you can control. Try to find the sliver of happiness, and then how can you spread it? That's Those are my parting words.
absolutely. And it's funny because you focus on family, which certainly makes sense in this kind
Mm,
of situation. I actually think this is one of those times where once the really critical time is over, I think it's an opportunity to actually look to our children
yeah.
because they don't, we're thinking, even think about our conversation today, ham radios and insurance structures and, did the federal government do what they needed to do? And was communications what it needed to be? Children are very here and now.
Mhm.
And I saw this video go by of two little girls in front of their house, which was completely demolished,
Mm.
singing Jesus Loves Me, This I Know, that little children's song.
Love it.
And I thought to myself, yup, because they went through something scary. They have each other, hopefully. They still have, mommy and daddy and grandma and, the puppy and whoever else was there, right? So at least the family unit is intact. But as much as grown-ups know more, I think kids are tapped into something so raw. Sometimes it makes them a pain in the patoot, but other times it makes them so resilient that just in their response to things, and they just go on. They just keep going on.
Yeah.
God love kids
Yeah.
for having the ability to stay focused on what's right in front of them. They can't master these situations, but they can give us a much needed lift when the rest of us are feeling down with all of this heavy grown-up stuff.
Absolutely. I think it's almost like whenever you need that new perspective on just life,
Mhm.
talk to someone under 7 or over 70,
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, Kris, if people are meeting us for the first time, if they haven't heard you speak on any of these subjects before, what would you advise that they do to learn more about you or to learn more about Una as a whole?
Yeah. So if you want to learn more about Una, you can go to una.com. There's a lot about what we do, how we do it. And then you can also learn more about the awesome people that I get the privilege of working with every single day. If you want to get in touch with me, I have no social media except for LinkedIn. So if you see another Kris Lance out there, it's not me. But it is Kris with a K on LinkedIn, KRIS. And you can get in touch with me that way. If you prefer just a direct email to set up a time where we can just talk or chat or meet each other, it's kris@una.com.
Awesome, Kris. Well, thank you so much. That's October in the bag.
There we go.
I will talk to you again in November. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.